So this is probably going to be a really controversial video, and I'm sure the flaming trolls are inbound, but this is something that I'm sure quite a lot of people experience, and hopefully in doing so either maybe changes can be made, or maybe it will show people that there are other options out there, perhaps if you've stopped gaming. So I'm going to be talking about why I've stopped playing Games Workshop games, and I have done for a while now. And I think I can confidently say that I'm probably never going to go back to them, despite that there seems to have been some good changes from having a new CEO. You know, their profits are up on the rise, as are their shares, and I think they've made some good directions in terms of changing rule sets, but also bringing out some of the old classic games that they got rid of a long time ago, the specialist games as I knew them when I played. Games Workshop originally got me into wargaming. I did this when I think I was 12 in year 7 in secondary school, maybe you call it high school where you're from, and Lord of the Rings had just come out, and we were playing, or we got into the Lord of the Rings miniature games, and that was from some of the guys who'd already played Warhammer and Warhammer 40k. Warhammer seemed to be more popular when I was a kid than 40k, but 40k was what I first got into after Lord of the Rings. And I mean, GW was good in that sense. It's probably one of the only games companies that has their own brick and mortar store solely for their game, and then that's really good. It gets people into the game. They make a lot of miniatures, and that's great. But I suppose as I got older, more and more things seemed to annoy me with the systems, with the company as a whole. So I think for me it's really difficult to be painting that amount of miniatures. You know, you're spending sort of maybe £300 on a large army. It was 1,500 points when I played, but maybe I think it's 1,850 you need. And you know, that's a reasonable amount of miniatures to be painting. And I'm not a great painter. I'm not a fast painter. And there's something about doing units to me that just seems really boring. They can look fantastic, but to be painting the same thing over and over again, it's just not something I want to do. You know, and I don't get the hype around Space Marines. You know, it's an iconic design, an iconic thing, but it's just so boring to paint. It's so bulky. There's no finesse to it. It's a very generic shape, and I don't get why people get so hyped about, you know, like these new, oh, it's got new bulges or it's got a new helmet, and I just don't get it, to be honest. So that really put me off. Then in terms of the game itself, for a long time you had codex creep, so the only way that they would keep you buying more miniatures and keep you in the game was that the newest release was the strongest and most OP thing that was to come out, and the same went for the codex. So this meant that you were spending a lot of money to just have a reasonably competitive army, and just to keep a hand in. And that I find that really, really annoying. I wouldn't get enough games in the time that it would take to buy the new rulebook, the new codex, and to have it worthwhile. It just wasn't good enough for me. A large part of that is because I didn't play in the stores. I didn't play in tournaments, and I didn't really play in some other places. And the reason for that is because I dislike a large proportion, I was going to say all, but that's not true, a large proportion of the Games Workshop community. A lot of it I found were children or immature players. A really vivid experience of mine that sticks out is that I once went into Games Workshop in Wolverhampton, and I was asking the manager for some Space Wolves, and over the back someone shouted, "Oh, you must be looking for Blood Angels," and I explained to them I wasn't, and they went into this whole thing about how Blood Angels are the best, and started telling me all this stuff, and he was very passionate about it, but so much so that it was off-putting. You know, he was too overboard with it all, and that was just really, really off-putting. I also find that you get a lot of traditional smelly nerds in that kind of domain. But I won't lie, and it'd be wrong to tarnish everyone with the same brush. you have a lot of people who are fantastic miniature painters. You have a lot of people who, you know, I made a good friendship group from some of the older community there. So it's not like that with everyone, but a vast amount of it I found wasn't great. So that really put me off Games Workshop in general, unfortunately. But again, that's my experience. You might have something completely different with your local meta, with your local community, but unfortunately that's how it was for me. The other thing I found quite difficult with Games Workshop in general was, which almost sounds counterproductive or counterintuitive, there's so much lore, so much fluff to go through. It's almost impossible to kind of get your head around it all, and that might be nice for some people. They can almost spend endless amount of times, but sort of looking into things and reading up and stuff. But it was a bit overwhelming for me. There was just too much. There are so many different factions that are so vastly different that it's very difficult to learn the game against and be good against all different types of players. There were so many singular different items, different miniatures that was so different that it gets a little bit over complex, really. And there's just almost so much to get your head around. So I didn't really feel like I had a handle on sort of my own hobby. There was just too much going on, too much being released, not just in terms of miniatures, but in terms of Black Library books and the like. So I found that quite difficult. And I suppose you would have to buy every other codex to learn about every other army, and the cost is just insurmountable, which is just ridiculous for a company that doesn't offer free rulebooks or you know, on such different armies. So that's a shame. Yeah, I find that quite difficult. I suppose when talking about tournaments and the accessibility tournaments, I play a lot of tournaments now. It's my main amount of play. Bizarrely, I found that decent sized tournaments or decent, I suppose the accessibility for tournaments wasn't amazing. I think you can find them, but they're not, they're predominantly at Warhammer World. So there's only one place to really go for that. And I'm sure there are others, but in terms of decent sized numbers and decently run ones, that wasn't something that I was too familiar with in the UK. And there seems to be something very different about the ethos or the etiquette of playing in those tournaments. It's very competitive, it's very cutthroat, because you don't have to work with your opponent like you do in other games. So for me, that's less enjoyable. It's about going, you know, or it appears to be going to a tournament to fully curb stomp your opponent. And that's not a good day out for me, because I suppose I'm a okay-ish player. I'm never going to be up there. So it's not a great day out for me when you're at those kind of tournaments. I think there's also something around the gameplay as well. In the majority of the main rule sets, Warhammer and Warhammer 40k, the way that you play for quite a long game as well, because it's not skirmish, it's a full-on army game. You know, so not only are you taking a long time to play it, but turns are taking very long. So it's a long time when you're not having any interaction, you're just waiting for someone to do something to you, apart from make the occasional armor save. So in terms of actually playing the game, I don't find it that fun as a format. For me, it's just not what I want to be doing for such a long amount of time as well. Whereas other games you can get a few games in a night, whether that's a skirmish game, Infinity, X-Wing, you can play, or Frostgrave, sort of get a few games in that night. So, or even other formats of games like RPGs, you're constantly needing to be aware and be, you know, involved in it because you are storytelling or rolling dice. Whereas these large army-based games, you've got quite a time to wait before you do anything. So that wasn't something I enjoyed either. And finally, as this turns into a full-on rant, the prices, how they kept going up, it's just not acceptable. Like some of the blister packs, you're paying £15 for a single lieutenant. How? Why? There is absolutely no way you can justify that. The move towards Finecast, if you can even call it that, what an absolute load of rubbish. It was an absolutely appalling product, and I don't know how it was justifiable. Don't know how whoever allowed that to go forward was thinking. And then also small things such as rebasing. Whilst you could say that it's been done for a creative purpose of making the miniature look better and fit better on the base, such as when Space Marines moved up to a larger base size, but I'm so skeptical that that's really the reason. You have the move to Age of Sigmar, where everything gets rebased from a square to a circular base. Now, that's horseshit. That's not because it looks better or it fits the game better. It's not to break away from being at unisizes. That's to get lazy people to purchase more miniatures. It's an underhanded marketing tactic. It's just small things like that why Games Workshop, I'm just not going to be returning to them. My stuff won't come out of the case. I've got loads and loads of it, and it's probably never going to see the light of day, which is a shame. The only thing I could see ever pulling me back in is perhaps specialist games. However, whilst they seem to have nice one-shots, they don't seem to be, at least in my area, taking off in terms of Blood Bowl. It was a flash in the pan. I don't know anyone that's actually playing Necromunda, which is a shame because of how good it was back in the day. But maybe that's because it hasn't got sustainability. So with that little rant, I will leave you guys to it. That's why I've moved away from Games Workshop. There seems to be much better games out there, which suits me in terms of playstyle, rule sets, as well as creatively. I prefer them. Let me know what keeps you playing these games, if you still do. It's certainly not for me, but I'd be interested in what you enjoy about it, or what you don't like about it, or don't like about the other companies that stops you moving away from it. I realise it was a bit ranty, but I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts. I will catch up with you guys next week. Don't flame too bad. Bye.